Okay, and we're live.
All right, good morning, everyone, welcome to the Environment Subcommittee. Hope everyone is wide awake, alert, and enthusiastic. So this 8 a.m. meeting. So we're going to pick up where we left off on HB 49, the BEPS bill. Uh, Kristen, could you show us the tweaks that have been made since yesterday?
Sure. So this change relates to the exclusion for energy use and greenhouse gas emissions related to the generation of emergency backup power. We added that this would also apply to buildings that are considered critical infrastructure, and the language was also further fleshed out relating to uh, I think before I was talking about related to generators at these facilities, and now that language reads related to the generation of emergency backup power at these various building industry categories.
Okay, any questions about that? All right, Kristen, why don't you move on to the next one?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I do have a quick question.
Sure.
I should have raised my hand fast enough.
That's okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kristen. With regard to the emergency backup energy generation, does this apply to hospitals? Are we making sure to exclude hospitals because they need the access to emergency power generation? Can you explain, please?
Hospital. So later in the bill, there is a list of categorical exclusions, and hospitals has been added to that list to be
Great, thank
excluded
you.
from.
Thank you so much. All right, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Delga Lehman?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. One quick question I forgot to ask yesterday, and I'm sure this is in the bill, but I didn't see it. What is if Kristen or someone could read me unless it's very, very lengthy, what is the exact definition of a hospital? Like, for example, I assume it has to have beds. It can't be like an emergency room only kind of building, or can it?
So we don't have a definition in the bill relating to hospitals. I do understand that there are a category that has been identified as a reporting category with the Energy Star that there's not that we've been told that it's an identifiable type of building, but there's not a definition that we have in this bill.
Okay, so it's based on the energy system that they have, not so much anything about the capacity or what type of, if it's long stay, short stay, an urgent care, type of facility. It's based on their actual energy setup. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no, well, I would say just it's a reporting category. I don't know what the parameters are around that. I'm not sure if we have anybody from the hospitals to represent, only that we've received the information that's an identifiable category within.
It must exist somewhere in law though, correct?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, could we just give an answer to that? We can move on, but is that
Okay.
somewhere in state statute, or how is that identified? Thank you.
Natasha?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. There is a definition in Maryland code for hospitals. It isn't referenced in the bill, but there is a definition.
Okay, would you mind when you have time sending that to my office so I can just take a look at it later today?
Yes, it will.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all.
Sure. Okay, Delgado?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see the critical infrastructure. I presume that would include wastewater treatment plants and water systems. I mean, I think that's important that they continue to function, because if you stop them, there's a problem.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head if under the state definition.
I would assume that that's what
I would assume
critical
so.
infrastructure means, and providing potable water and treating wastewater, so.
Well, how about this, Charles? Hopefully again, today we'll approve the reprints. Between today and when it comes to a voting committee, we'll confirm that.
That'll be fine. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Delegate Lehman, do you have your hand up? No? Okay. Okay, next change, Kristen, please.
This one relates to the SCIF exemption, and language was added to also include facilities that are operated by a contractor of the various agencies or the state.
Yeah, and this is to address what we discussed yesterday. The contractor had been inadvertently left out. So contractor is added by an agency or contractor of the U.S. that operates a SCIF. Any questions about that? Okay, Kristen, you want to move on?
There's language in the bill that was to delay the imposition of or the collection of alternative compliance fees as well as penalties. And this language was further clarified that the department cannot charge the alternative compliance fees or impose penalties until 2032, but that does not apply to the department's ability to enforce for lack of meeting the reporting requirements under the regulations and statute.
Delegate Foley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kristen, I didn't understand what you just said. It doesn't include, can you explain what that means about what it doesn't include?
Yes, so the buildings have to report certain information to the department, which they'll base their requirements off of. And so if that information is not being reported to the department could take enforcement action to ensure that they're receiving the appropriate data.
Okay, but it says here they may not impose.
They may not impose, yes, it says they may not impose and collect alternative compliance fees until 2032, and they may not impose and collect penalties for failure to achieve building energy performance standards until 2032. However, this prohibition does not apply to the imposition and collection of penalties for failure to meet any reporting requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You want to move on, Kristen?
I think for the changes, I believe those were all the updates since yesterday.
Okay. So now what I'd like to do is entertain a motion for approval of the amendments, all the amendments to the bill.
Move the amendments.
Okay, so second.
Second.
All right. Any final questions about these amendments? Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a real quick question. So, Krista, at the end of the day, are cannabis facilities included as an exemption, or are they?
They are not. They're not identified in the bill, and when we reached out to MDE, they said they have not received any request for exemptions from a cannabis facility, and if they did, they would have to evaluate it under the current definitions of whether or not that facility would meet those definitions. But they didn't have an answer. There's not a cannabis facility. They're not mentioned in the bill.
And the second one, where are the AI facilities if they ever build them in Maryland?
Pardon?
The data centers.
So they're considered critical infrastructure. So that would be in the exclusion for the backup generation for emergency power.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions about the amendments, which have been moved and seconded? All right, all those in favor of the amendments, say aye.
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 Bye.
Opposed? Okay, the bill as amended.
Move the bill, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of the bill as amended, say aye.
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 Opposed? Nay.
No.
Okay, so let's see, that's Charles
And Todd.
and Todd. Okay. Okay, all right, thank you. Bill is amended, passes. Now we'll consider Delegate Foley's amendment.
Move her amendment.
Okay, so second.
Second.
Okay. Any questions about her amendment?
Mr. Chair, I didn't raise my hand, but I have a question
Sure.
On your amendment?
on the amendment for Kristen. So Kristen, if this amendment is adopted and is part of the bill, is there would the county be able to impose or establish alternative compliance pathways and impose compliance fees under the state BEPS if a program was not certified by the MDE? In other words, if it didn't meet the MDE requirements, if a county imposed BEPS or adopted BEPS that were not as stringent as the state BEPS, could they then impose fines and compliance fees under this section?
So under this amendment's applying strictly to those programs that have been certified by MDE as being at least as stringent. So this is not granting any additional authority elsewhere to a program that would be less stringent. This is only applying to those programs that have been certified by MDE under the amendment language and the amendments that were just moved in the reprint. This is only for programs that are certified by the department as being as least as stringent as the state program.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think we had a motion and a second on Delegate Foley's amendment. Any other questions? All right, all those in favor of Delegate Foley's amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. And now what we're going to do, Delegate Ruth hasn't made it back, has she? Not yet. Okay, so what we're going to do is going to hold the bill until she's able to come back, because she does have an amendment related to hospitals that she would like us to consider. So at this point, we'll, we've approved the amendments in the reprint, Delegate Foley's amendment. Just hold the bill until Delegate Ruth comes back, and we will move on to House Bill 747. And the way we left things yesterday with House Bill 747 was that the amendments had been moved and seconded from a couple meetings ago. I requested a hold pending feedback from the local health authorities. And Dom, are you on the call? Or someone from Mako?
Hey, this is Sarah from Mako.
Yeah, hi, Sarah. So did you get feedback from your local health authorities?
Yes, yeah, Carrington Anderson on our team is handling this bill, and she got feedback from them this morning, and she said we're good to go.
Okay. All right, so the amendments are good to go.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions then about the amendments? I think Kristen showed them on the screen yesterday. Does anybody want to see them again, or are we good to go with considering them? Delegate Morgan.
I was wondering, I sent some stuff in last night. Kristen, does that help the bill, hurt the bill, or what do you think? From St. Mary's County Health Department.
Yeah, what you said last night, it sounded like they had some issues with the bill about having the information being reported. And they also cited some confusion. There's an exemption in the bill that relates to certain familial relationships, and hold on, I'm going to bring it up. And so the bill's requirements indicate that an inspection or pump out would be valid for 3 years. Then there's language that being added into the property transfer part of the bill, which would exclude certain relationships, property being refinanced, et cetera. And that would not include, that would only apply to when a system has been inspected within the immediate immediately preceding 5-year period. So there were some questions or confusion about the 5-year versus the 3-year. And they also did express concern about the reporting of the failures and the reporting of when the system was fixed.
So does it affect the 3 and 5 years? Is that I'm not aware. Is there a contradiction in the bill?
So I do think they are separate. Where the 3-year applies to the requirements of you know as a condition of the sale that the purchaser will ensure that the systems have been inspected or pumped out. And if they've had that done within 3 years, they would meet those requirements. And separate from that is this exemption from this requirement is when a property transfer involves certain family relationships or other situations, as long as the property's been inspected within the immediately preceding 5-year period. They are separate in the way that I read the bill. I don't think there's a conflict other than the question of like why 3 years, why 5 years, but there's not a direct conflict of those two provisions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Delegate Lehman. Mary, you're on mute.
Yeah, am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, Kristen, could you just really briefly go over the health department responsibilities really briefly?
They would be receiving this information. So when a landlord or in a property transfer, there's an inspection of a septic system, and that inspection shows that there's a failing system, the owner of the property has to notify the delegated approval authority, which would be the local health department, about the failure and when the system is fixed. There's not a direct responsibility being required of local health departments. However, they will be receiving this information from owners of property.
Okay, and what if they don't receive it for some reason? So they're the recipient of the information. What if they don't receive it, then what?
There's nothing in the bill that addresses that.
Okay. And if someone, Kristen, aren't county health department employees actually state employees? I believe.
That may be right, but I'm not sure.
They're kind of like DSS. So I assume they're backed up by somebody. I just think, what about really small counties? Do they actually have the bandwidth to do this? But I assume we would have heard some concerns about that if they did not. Is that a safe assumption?
I'm going to call on Sarah Sample from Mako.
Yeah, I can confirm that we did check in and there were not concerns broadly. I can also add that this is already the process for a failing well that we have to be notified. So it's sort of just rolling the failing septics into that. And then I would also just add that as far as whether or not they're state employees, they're not all state employees. There are definitely some hybrid departments. There are some that have more state employees. There are some that are almost entirely county, like Montgomery County. So it's variable.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Yep.
Chair.
Okay. Any other questions about the amendments to 747? And again, let's see, Delegate Lehman and Kristen, these amendments are both the technical one and the other ones that had been that had been suggested by Delegate Guyton. Is that right?
So no, so this is not showing the amendment that Delegate Guyton had introduced to extend some sunset termination dates, some implementation dates relating to the state board. I can bring that up on the screen, but that is not shown on this.
That is separate. Okay, well, why don't we consider Delegate Lehman's amendment first?
Okay.
Okay. So is everyone clear? Everyone good with what Delegate Lehman is proposing as an amendment to the bill? Okay. Right. So all those in favor of Delegate Lehman's amendment to 747, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And then, Kristen, could you discuss the technical amendment? Well, you discussed it yesterday, but just summarize your summary from yesterday?
Sure. I was going to bring it up too. Well, it's hard to show all of it. Actually, I don't think I'm sharing it. Hold on. So this is extending a termination provision that's on the current property transfer license. That license will sunset once the state board starts licensing individuals, and the amendment just delays the sunset date of the current license and the implementation of the state board by 2 years, just to give everybody a little bit extra time to get the board set up.
Okay. Everyone clear on those amendments? Is there a motion in favor of those amendments?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, and Kristen, that between what we just passed and what we Delegate Lehman's amendments, those are all the amendments to 747. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, so now we'll take a motion to move the bill as amended.
Move the bill as amended.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of the bill as amended, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, bill as amended passes. Thank you. Now I understand Delegate Ruth is on the call. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Delegate Ruth, we held HB 49 so we could consider your amendment regarding
you.
hospital. So could you present that?
Thank you. Kristen, can you bring it up?
Yes.
So while she's doing that, I'll just, for anyone who wasn't here yesterday in subcommittee, I don't want to pick on hospitals, and Natasha and I had a great conversation yesterday. I just don't think that I have concerns about completely removing a whole category of buildings from covered buildings where they don't have to make any changes ever. And I do recognize that hospitals have specific needs and specific, that some of those are already handled in the language of the bill. But what I'm proposing is to not remove them from covered buildings, but exempt them from the EUI standards. So essentially, they would still have to account for the direct emissions. So if they have the example that we talked about yesterday, if they have a gas furnace without being accountable at all, they could just replace that with another gas furnace when it reaches the end of its life. But by exempting them from EUI, they don't have to worry about any of that. They wouldn't have to worry about the waiver process. All they would have to do is make sure that as they're, replacing things, that they replace them with clean energy. So this amendment, as you can see here, it just removes hospital, which we just added with amendments. It removes it from covered building, does not include. And then Kristen, if you want to scroll to I think it's.
Is it not showing? I'm at the bottom. It's so, can you see where it says?
Oh, I see. Okay, I'm sorry.
No
Yeah,
problem.
so up above where it talks about the SCIFs being exempt from EUI, it just adds exempt from energy use intensity targets, a covered building that is a hospital. And that's it.
Okay. All right, Delegate Ruth, do you want to, there are a couple questions we've got, but anything else you want to add to the rationale for your amendment?
No, I think this provides a really good path forward that should not cause too much, it shouldn't really cause a burden for the hospitals. The EUI, I know, is a concern for them, and then with this they don't have to meet the EUI at all.
Okay, we have a couple questions. Delegate Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate Ruth, for this thoughtful amendment. I can see your intent, which is to make sure that we move closer and closer to our, clean energy goals. But as someone who's worked in the public health and medical field and who knows what conditions hospitals can sometimes face in emergency situations. Emergency situations are more likely now in the current environment, the climate environment we're in, with floods and fires and everything. I'm concerned that your thoughtful and, well-intentioned amendment could put hospitals in a difficult position. And if I'm understanding, I want to make sure I understand, the provision here that you're proposing basically says that if I'm understanding, that when a hospital's energy source, it's a natural gas fired, whatever, reaches the end of its life and has to be replaced, the hospital is required to replace that with clean energy, a source like geothermal. Can you clarify that for me?
Is MDE on? Because they could probably explain it better than I could.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris?
Good morning, Chris Oakland, MD Air and Radiation Administration. If they were exempt from the EUI targets, but not exempt from the GHG targets, then they would have direct emissions reduction targets like other buildings. And so as fossil fuel burning equipment comes up for replacement, they should in that case consider equipment that does not emit CO2. Geothermal would be one option. There are also standard air source heat pumps that would be an option. Under the bill, there are many other exemptions and waivers. For example, they wouldn't have to consider that for their generation of process steam or for their backup generators. There are already provisions added to the bill so that those would be exempt. So it would effectively be their space heating and water heating. And potentially some other building uses where they would, like other buildings, consider zero carbon alternatives subject to the waivers for economic and feasibility and timeline that are also already in the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. So let me make sure I understood. You said this provision in practice only affects the hospital's water heating and space heating utility. Is that what you said?
So any fuel burning equipment that is not for the purposes of process steam, because there's a waiver for that. There's an exemption for that in the bill that is not related to emergency backup generation. There's a provision to exempt that from the bill. Generally, the remaining uses would be things like space heating, water heating, but any fossil fuel burning application beyond that would also be covered.
And just to understand, don't turn your mic off. And just to understand, if I heard you right, at the end of the natural life of that fossil fuel burning equipment, the hospital can consider replacing it with a carbon neutral energy source. Are they required to replace it, or they can consider? Could you clarify that difference?
Sure thing. So they would be subject to declining GHG standards that under the law go down to 0 by 2040 for all building types. But there are options to not do that for any building. There are alternative compliance payment options. There is a timeline, useful life of the equipment waiver built into the bill. There is an economic and feasibility waiver built into the bill. So in the bill as it exists right now, they would have many options to not perform the project if it is not at a timeline that's consistent with the useful life of the equipment, or if it's at a cost at which they would pursue an economic and feasibility waiver.
And last question, if I may, Mr. Chair, thank you. Sure. I'm curious if, since Delegate Ruth did take the extra time and did talk with the hospitals, I wonder if there's anyone from the hospitals on the call who could comment on their perspective on this amendment.
Natasha?
Yes. Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Delegate Ruth did reach out and discuss this amendment with us. we still do disagree and urge that the language that is in this reprint is the language that the committee moves forward with. And it's very important to us as hospitals that all our decisions are made based on the need for patient safety, and that all our decisions have to be based on advancing patient safety and care. And so this does put us in a position where ultimately hospital resources down the line, from the way ND has explained it, would still have to be diverted from our operations to capital costs to address these needs. Otherwise, we would still be paying compliance fees and going through the rest of the process, which is still costly. And again, the hospitals are under global budgets that are set by the state. The state sets our rates through the Health Services Cost Review Commission. And so those capital costs are not built into our rates. They would have to come either from us diverting it from other uses, or we would have to be supplied that in the rates by the state. And it's just very important that we can't operate on a maybe. If right now the technology we have for our HVAC, which has to meet CMS standards, for all our other energy needs, it has to be reliable. And so at this point, those heat pumps, these other alternative sources cannot power the hospitals to the extent hospitals need to make sure they do not go down during natural disasters or other situations. And this is really important, particularly in parts of the state where there is only one hospital. And as we mentioned earlier, the hospital definition is very narrow and does not include a lot of other facilities.
Thank you, Ms. Mayhew. May I have a question, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Thank you very much. So I fully understand the necessity for emergency energy backup for hospitals, and agree wholeheartedly that patient safety is number one priority. Hospitals are a little bit different than school buildings or retail buildings. Life and death decisions are made in hospitals. So we don't want to undermine their ability to function. We see what happens in emergency situations like war zones, what happens when hospitals don't have energy. At the same time, I do understand Delegate Ruth's intent, and I want to make sure I get at the heart of what I hear is your argument, Ms. Mayhew. You mentioned that upgrading energy infrastructure is a capital expense, would be a capital expense for a hospital. And hospitals are under a global budget here in Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it the case, though, that every energy utility has a limited lifespan, and that's already baked into the hospital's budget? If you buy an air conditioner today, you know that in 10 years you have to replace it, and so you already know that. This isn't. I don't think Delegate Ruth's asking for an additional expense. I think what she's saying is when the natural life of that machinery ends, you'd have to replace it anyway. In a perfect world, technology would be better, faster, and cheaper by the time that happened. Isn't it the case that you've got to replace equipment anyway? And so how do you perceive this this provision as being really any different? How would this impact? Also knowing that hospitals are doing okay. So can you help me with that last question? And thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. And I think what's important to note is, as you said, in a perfect world, the technology would advance by the time that our equipment, reaches the end of its life. As I understand from speaking to, hospital engineers and our other experts, this technology just does not exist now. And so the concern is at the end of the life, and that could vary depending on when, the current systems have been put in place, that the hospitals would still be in a position that they would need to continue to rely on equipment that does generate emissions, because that is the only equipment still available to do so. And at that point, we would still be under the other provisions of the bill that MD explains, with waivers and otherwise. So it's really just important for us not to be in that position where we're, on an if or maybe or possibly in the future. Again, just because, the types of needs that hospitals have can't rely on ifs or maybes. So ultimately, it is in hospitals, benefits to be energy efficient, and to the extent they can, they do. Talking with some of the systems, Johns Hopkins is putting in place a sustainability committee. Other hospitals have similar things they're doing. But again, it's just really important as part of this bill that we get that very limited exemption for hospital buildings.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you guys for that discussion we had just now, particularly Natasha and Doug. I guess my question here is, Chris had made a comment before about when the useful life expires, you'll go back to the exemption, and MDE will be the governing body that will help make that decision. Has that heard that correctly?
Kristen, do you want to amplify on any comment that you made?
I'm not sure which comment I made. I guess I'm not sure how to answer that.
That helps me a lot. Thank you.
Well, Delegate Morgan, maybe was it the point about how a building can get a waiver for the useful life of equipment that they've installed that doesn't allow them to get to particular EUI targets as long as they meet the 2040 goal?
Well, I think, excuse me, yeah, I think that's part of it. But like I said, I remember, if I think of, hospitals, plural, throughout the state, and I think Natasha has a point that on capital operating costs, I get hit up by St. Mary's Hospital, we don't have the money, the funds, et cetera. And simultaneously, as the rates are set by the state, the operating capital margins, they slim themselves down towards the middle at the end of the day. And my concern becomes, my daughter's a nurse, so I worry about her and the circumstances surrounding her. And I want to make sure that not only are the patients safe, but the staff is safe, and that we're doing the best we can to ensure, I think patient safety at the end of the day overrides the overwhelming desire to make these things as green as we can be. How's that?
Okay. All right. Thank you. And two more questions, and I'll ask folks to be as brief as possible so we can take a vote and try to move on to another bill, at least for a few minutes. Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had 2 points and one just went out of my head. So I appreciate Natasha's comments and the concerns. I did, first of all, she mentioned natural disasters, and I wanted to point out that they still have the ability to have backup generators. That exemption is already in the bill. And the other point I wanted to make was regarding cost. As people move away from natural gas, the people who are remaining on natural gas will be paying more for natural gas, including for the transmission costs. And so if the hospital were to stay with natural gas, it's very likely that their costs would go up for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Natasha. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you make it sound as if there are no hospitals currently that have electric, which would reduce carbon emissions, electric heating and air conditioning. Is that so?
No, I'm not saying that there's absolutely no electric use in the hospitals. I'm just saying that there are, in the vast range of things that hospitals do, there are things that require the energy generation that releases some of the gas that this bill is trying to present because the technology doesn't exist. So for instance, for oxygen administration, oxygen vaporizers are required to convert liquid oxygen to gaseous state before it's administered to patients. And at present, there's no technology available to accomplish that task without combustion fuels. And we also do have to meet a lot of federal HVAC standards. So I'm not saying that it doesn't exist at all. I'm just saying that we are seeking this exemption because in the places where we need to rely on the combustion energy for day-to-day services for patient care and safety, we need to make sure that is in the bill, and that's the primary consideration for hospitals. Again, that does not mean down the line, as things come online, that they will do these things, but the way this system is set up, again, the technology currently doesn't exist for some of our requirements. And then down the line, should that still not exist, we would have to comply with the alternative pathways and other things. And so ultimately, they do in some cases have some electric components. It's not that they don't at all.
Okay,
Okay, Delegate Ruth,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could just ask a clarifying question to follow up on that. So the oxygen that you said depends on combustion. I'm not understanding how that works. Doesn't that just plug into the wall, or there are actual like generators sitting there with the oxygen, or am I not understanding?
I can't speak to exactly how that looks. Again, I've been talking with a lot of hospital experts. These are very technical things that go on in hospitals. And so it is very important for the administration of patient care, but a little bit more technical than I can get into how exactly that looks in the hospital itself.
Thank you. That just makes it difficult because, I certainly don't want to impact oxygen, but every oxygen generator I've seen plugs into the wall, and I'm just not picturing what that would look like. Thanks.
okay, so Delegate Ruth's amendment is before us. Is there a motion for the amendment?
Can I move the amendment,
Sure.
please?
Is there
I'll
a second?
second it.
Okay, all those in favor, I guess I'll ask for raised hands. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, Dylan, Sheila, Mary, let's see. Linda, I'm sorry, Nick, did you have your hand up? Okay. Okay, so yes, Dylan, Sheila, Mary, Linda, Nick. Opposed, please raise your hands. Okay, Todd, Charles, and Robin. Okay, the amendment passes 5-4. So, so now we have two amendments that have been passed since we adopted the previous amendment. So we need to once again move the bill as amended to include Delegate Foley's amendment and Delegate Ruth's amendment. So
Move the bill favorable as amended, Mr. Chair.
second.
All those in favor of the bill as amended, say aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Okay.
No.
I'm sorry, how many noes were there?
No.
No. 3. Okay. Charles, Robin, and Todd. Okay. Bill passes as amended. Okay, thank you for everyone's work on this bill from all sources, subcommittee, advocates, and staff. So we've got a little bit of time, about 10 minutes to start discussion about the bottle bill. So Kristen, could I turn to you for that?
Sure, Mr. Chair. I'm going to bring up the reprint copy and
For two reasons. One, we do have amendments that delay implementation dates, but also just, I guess, just to show the bill too. It's a lengthy bill.
Excuse me, Kristen, could you tell us the bill? Oh, we're going to see the bill number.
House Bill 232.
Thank
No
you.
problem. Oops. Hold on. So the bill is establishing the Maryland Beverage Container Recycling Refund and Litter Reduction Program. Is Section 9-737 is providing definitions that are relevant to the bill. So for example, let's see, it's going to go to, so a beverage, so this would apply to beverage containers, which would be a bottle, can, or other container that has been sealed by manufacturers, made of glass, metal, or plastic, and at the time of sale contains 3 liters or less of a beverage. I don't know if you want me just to go over definitions or kind of just get into more of the meat of the bill.
Yeah, more of the meat of the bill, I think is fine. Our goal in the next 10 minutes is just to review as much of the bill as we can, then we'll continue discussion at our meeting tomorrow.
So Section 9-17 1738 is expressing the intent of the General Assembly. It's to reduce the volume of litter and plastic pollution from beverage containers in the state, and by achieving redemption rate at least 90%. And then it just goes on to talk about other intentions of the program. The bill sets program targets. And by amendment, those target dates are being extended by 3 years.
Hang on, I'm sorry. Can you go back up again? Where you just were with the rate,
The targets for the program?
yeah, so 90% redemption rate, would that mean 90% of all bottles are turned in?
Right.
Kristen, I have a question about that too, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
So these targets have to do with the amount. I'm confused about what the target rates are supposed to do. Like, why do we have them? That might be a dumb question, but I sort of forget.
I think the idea is when you're paying a deposit on a container, is that the idea is that you want to actually recover that container back, to have that material come back. And
yeah, I understand that part, but what's the significance of the target rates? I mean, we're basing this on consumers redeeming the containers. And so what's the effect of not hitting that target? Let me put it another way. What does the bill say the effect of not hitting the targets are?
I'm not sure. We'll have to look at the bill. I'm not sure if the advocates are on the call, but
Yeah, is there any advocate on the call that could address that? Peter Blair?
maybe
Hi,
not.
Peter Blair. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director with Just Zero. So failure to meet the performance standards would do 2 things. First, if they're not met for 2 consecutive years, the deposit value, the amount that consumers pay on the refund, would increase.
Okay.
This is taken from Oregon's program. You know, if it's not being returned, there's not enough financial incentive. So you raise the deposit to incentivize it. There's also some financial penalties to make sure that the PRO, the stewardship organization responsible for implementing the program, is setting up the redemption network in a way that makes it convenient. and accessible for consumers.
Okay, and who pays the penalties?
The stewardship organization, the PRO, or I don't remember the specific name in this bill, but the beverage companies.
Okay, thank you.
And does MDE set what those penalties are? Peter?
I believe they're specified in statute or will be defined by rule. Martha might know better than I do.
Okay, well, that's okay. I think Delegate Foley, you're good with that, with your question. Okay.
Yeah, I think the penalties are towards the end, so we can review those provisions too once we get to that. So section 9-1741 is.
I'm sorry. I had
Okay, Delegate Ruth.
I'm sorry, I still trying to understand this. So by 2038, at least 10% of all beverage containers are returned and refilled. And I don't understand how that's different from the 90% and 70% above.
Peter, can you explain that?
Yeah, the 10% by 2038 is refilled. So it's the amount of beverage containers that are no longer single use, produced to recycle. It's being refilled and recirculated.
I understand. Thank you.
Delegate Morgan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going backwards off all these percentages. The organization that's tasked to do this, how are they picked?
So how is the PRO established?
Yeah, I mean, is a sole source contract somebody comes up with? Is it competitively bid through the state procurement system? We're talking a lot of money at the end of the day before you get the money to be used in the refunds or the deposits. I should word it better.
Yeah, I think MDE would be selecting the PRO, but again, I think for these types of questions, I think the advocates would be best to address them.
Yeah, so Peter or Martha explain how the PRO is selected. Martha?
Yes, actually, it would be selected in much the same way that the PRO was being selected for that EPR for packaging bill. They would put out requests for proposals, and this organization would be representing and working with all of the beverage producers selling beverages in the state. So through the normal process.
I think I know what it means. Could you please tell us what PRO stands for?
Sorry, Producer Responsibility Organization. And in this bill, we call it the Stewardship Organization, which is the same thing, just to eliminate any confusion between bills. Yeah.
Okay. Delegate Morgan, you good?
Yes, sir.
Delegate Otto?
So this would be similar to the paint recycling stuff. I mean, basically you had one organization that was soaking it up in administrative costs.
So someone from the advocates or from MDE who wants to answer that?
I can answer it if it's okay. Yes, it would be similar to the paint care program. So this is a form of producer responsibility legislation. So you're essentially taking the responsibility for collecting, processing, and recycling beverage containers from consumers onto producers. So there would be a single stewardship organization, PRO, that is responsible for largely administering the requirements of the law. They would be overseen by the department to make sure that everything's moving smoothly, but they would handle a lot of the nuts and bolts of how the system actually works.
So would these contracts go before the Board of Public Works to be approved?
No, it would be a process where there is a submission, the department would select the stewardship organization, and then they would develop what is called a producer responsibility plan. Once the plan is approved, that sets out for a period of time the actions the organization will take to implement the requirements of the law. When the plan comes to an end, resubmit the plan, learn from previous mistakes, implement it again, is the basic understanding.
My other question is on this 10% of beverage containers be returned and refilled, what percentage do we have now?
I don't have an exact number. I would assume it's extremely low. There is evidence from Oregon and the United States that when you build these types of systems, you're creating both the infrastructure and consumer culture that creates these refillable networks because people are returning their containers, they're cleaned, they're sterilized, and then they're put back into circulation. Europe's programs have extremely high rates of reuse and refill, I believe. Germany is somewhere around 85% of their beer bottles specifically are returned and refilled primarily through their deposit return system.
Well, that would be like using our little cans and getting the draft beer or something like that. I mean,
yeah, in Oregon, the way it works is they've developed specific containers that are reusable. So the same way that someone would return through the program, they're single-use containers to be crushed and recycled. They're just separated out, sent to a cleaning facility, then sent back to the manufacturers and refilled rather than having to go through the recycling process.
and what's the cost differential between that and
Delegate Morgan, I'm sorry, Delegate Otto, I'll have to ask you to hold that question since we're at 8:59.
okay?
Try to keep that question in mind for tomorrow when we pick up again. We have to knock off now since it's a minute before 9. Thanks everyone for the discussion. We'll continue discussing this bill tomorrow. Expect a longer subcommittee meeting tomorrow after bill hearings. So we'll continue the discussion on bottle bill tomorrow as well as other things. So with that, I'll say thank you and see you on the floor. Thank you.